Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we're going to improve our table saw skills by cutting a double bridle joint. We've been creating a series for Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal designed to help you improve your skills at the table saw. In the October 2016 issue, we worked on rabbet joints. This time, we're going to take those skills a step further. We're going to cut a double bridle joint, which is a very strong and attractive joint that's ideal for chair and bench construction, as well as any time you need a good, solid 90-degree joint. So let's get started. To begin, you need a table saw blade with a flat grind on the teeth. You can use one of the blades from your dado set if it's thin enough, but it's worth investing in a good rip blade with flat teeth because they're very useful for all sorts of table saw joinery. I'll put a link to a couple of my favorites in the notes below the video. You're also going to need a good tenon jig. If you don't already have one, I strongly recommend the Incremental tenon jig I designed recently. I'll put a link to a set of plans for building that in the notes too. It will give you the ability to easily fine-tune the fit of your joint, and its homemade incremental positioner makes it possible to cut a bunch of these with perfect repeatability. It's a real time saver. But for this video, I'm going to use a very simple over-the-fence tenon jig so you can see how it would be done without the convenience of my incremental jig. I begin by laying out my joint right on the ends of the workpieces. Sometimes I use tape so I can see my pencil lines easier on darker woods, and I always use a sharp pencil. A double bridle joint is essentially 5 tenons that mesh together. You can make the 2 inner tenons thicker or thinner to add some visual interest if you like. It's also a good idea to color in the waist areas so you don't get confused later. Now as I cut my joint, pay attention to the order of my cuts. This isn't arbitrary. There is a reason for this process, which you'll see when we get to the end. I'm going to start with the double tenon. To avoid confusion, we'll call this piece, which is made from walnut, the stile. I set the jig to cut a curve pretty much right down the center. On this first cut, I'm also sneaking the blade up to the proper height. I don't want to crank it all the way up before I start. It's far better to raise it a little bit at a time, taking a couple of extra passes until the curve just touches my baseline. Once I get the height set, I rotate the workpiece 180 degrees and make another pass. This will widen the curve while keeping it centered on the end of the workpiece. If I need the curve wider yet, I move my jig closer to the blade a tiny bit and repeat the process. Since we called the first part the stile, we'll call the maple piece with its 3 tenons the rail. On this, I'm going to cut both of the slots at the same time. I make one cut, then rotate the workpiece 180 degrees and make another. Then I move the jig a bit and repeat the same cut, rotate, cut process. We're sneaking up on the perfect fit while keeping the 2 slots evenly spaced. Right now, I'm just eyeballing the fit between the center tenon on the rail and the slot in the end of my stile. When it looks good, I'm ready to move on to the next step. I'm moving back to my stile and starting from the outside. I'm doing the same cut, rotate, cut process, working my way inward. As I get close to my lines, I start checking the fit. If it's too tight, I go back to the jig and shave a tiny bit more off both sides until I sneak up on that perfect fit. And after a little sanding, you have a nice looking joint. Now, why did I switch back and forth between the rail and the stile instead of cutting one half at a time using my pencil marks as a guide? Because I don't trust my pencil marks. If you want a perfect joint, you have to custom fit it as you cut. Pencil marks are an important guide, but they're no substitute for sneaking up on that perfect fit. And this process gives you the best path to that goal. Keep these principles in mind because you didn't just learn to cut a double bridle joint. You learned some important skills that you can now apply to other table saw tasks, which we'll cover in future issues of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. So be sure to get your free subscription over at stumpynubs.com. Every issue is full of great tips, tricks, techniques, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker. Happy double bridling!